Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. You've got this prized tomato plant right at the edge of your backyard. But its leaves have turned the color of old paper, the stems are sagging toward the ground, and those flowers that just opened up, yeah, they've already closed for good. Look, it's a completely universal pain point for anyone who loves growing their own food. Most of us see this, we throw our hands up in total defeat, and we reach right for the shovel to toss that plant straight onto the compost heap. But today, we're going to dig into the actual science of why you really need to put that shovel down.
So is it dead or is it just starving? That is literally the million-dollar question. Soil scientists who actually study the exact moment a plant starts to decline have found something that changes everything. In almost every single case, that plant isn't finished. It's simply starving. It's running out of one or two very specific nutrients that the soil can just no longer provide. Most gardeners mistakenly assume the plant has reached the end of its life cycle, but the truth is, it's just crying out for a highly specific meal.
Well, spoiler alert, it's probably just starving. And get this, the cure is literally sitting right there in your kitchen trash can. There are 5 zero-cost, incredibly fast-acting liquid fertilizers sitting right in the average kitchen. These are proven remedies that university soil labs have measured and that generations of Amish and Mennonite farmers have used for decades. But, they've been largely suppressed by the profit-driven garden industry for one very simple reason: there is absolutely no way to file a patent on a banana peel.
All right, let's look at the roadmap for today. We're going to cover 5 of these lost knowledge remedies: onion peels, rice water, vegetable scraps, the kitchen cocktail, and finally, manure tea.
Starting things off with number 1, onion peels, the ultimate plant immunity booster.
You know that papery brown skin of the onion we always just toss in the garbage? Well, it actually holds a massive dose of nutrients, and it illustrates this really fascinating biological connection. Those onion skins carry a compound called quercetin. It's the exact same compound that makes red wine, apples, and blueberries so protective for the human heart. But inside a plant, quercetin does similar protective work. It shields the leaves from harsh summer sun, slows down fungal infections like stem rot, and literally switches on the plant's internal immune defenses against heat waves and sudden cold snaps. Now, a lot of folks make the mistake of just digging those dry skins straight into the dirt. And sure, while that eventually works, it takes weeks to break down, and by then, your wilting plant is totally dead. The correct method relies on water extraction. Just like making a cup of tea, if you steep a handful of dry skins in a quart jar of cool tap water for 24 to 48 hours, those minerals immediately dissolve. You get this deep amber, root-ready liquid. Pour that right at the base of your yellowing tomato, and it begins working within days. No breaking down required.
Moving right along to number 2, rice water, the microbiome builder.
When you rinse uncooked rice, you're left with this cloudy water that's loaded with starches, B vitamins, and zinc. But the real magic is happening entirely underground. To understand this, we've got to look back to the 1980s research of Japanese agricultural scientist Dr. Teruo Higa from the University of the Ryukyus. He introduced the concept of effective microorganisms, or EM. His work proved that adding certain beneficial microbes to depleted soil can bring it back to life in a matter of weeks. These exact formulas are now used in over 150 countries. And the craziest part? Those exact same microbes appear naturally and completely for free in our own kitchens.
So the real secret here comes down to the smell. Most of us just pour fresh rice water on our plants, which is super mild and honestly doesn't do much. The real trick is letting it sit in a covered jar at room temperature for 3 to 5 days until it gets a faintly sour smell, kind of like sourdough starter. That sour smell means lactic acid bacteria and wild yeasts have actually bloomed. When you dilute this fermented liquid, say 1 part rice water to 10 parts plain water, and pour it into your garden, those starches act as a massive feast. We're talking about literally tripling the soil's microbiome population in just 1 week. It builds out the plant's support system so the soil can feed the plant indefinitely.
All right, number 3 on our list, vegetable scraps for that fast nitrogen fix.
We all have them, right? That forgotten, bruised tomato or the completely wilted head of lettuce sitting in the crisper drawer. Well, these are the absolute fastest home remedy for a nitrogen deficiency. This actually builds on a core law of agriculture, discovered way back in the 1840s by German chemist Justus von Liebig. He essentially proved that even if your tomato has abundant potassium and phosphorus, if it's missing just a tiny bit of nitrogen, growth completely stops right at that nitrogen line.
This whole idea actually became known as the law of the minimum. Think of it perfectly illustrated by a wooden barrel. The water inside can only rise as high as the shortest stave. And in the average American backyard garden, nitrogen is almost always that shortest stave. To fix this instantly, you just crush those soft, bruised vegetable scraps into a bucket. Submerge them in water and let them ferment for 2 weeks. Bacteria tear the plant cells apart in this process called nitrogen mineralization, pulling that locked-up nitrogen straight into a dark, pungent liquid.
But hey, pay really close attention here, because this exact method burns more gardens every single summer than anything else. You must dilute this pungent liquid, 1 part scrap digestate to 30 parts fresh water. And you absolutely must pour it exclusively at the roots. If you apply it undiluted, or if you make the massive mistake of spraying it directly onto the leaves, it will scorch the plant beyond recovery. Diluted at the root zone, though, it turns pale, tired leaves a deep, rich green in just 4 to 6 days.
Which brings us to number 4, the ultimate kitchen cocktail for a full-spectrum rescue. Okay, so what if your plant is missing 5 or 6 different nutrients all at once? Check out how each household ingredient in this full-spectrum brew perfectly targets a specific plant failure. Banana peels deliver the potassium you need to drive fruit production and prevent your tomatoes from splitting their skins. Finely crushed eggshells provide calcium carbonate that stops that super frustrating black sunken patch at the bottom of tomatoes known as blossom end rot. Used coffee grounds give a nice slow release of nitrogen. Epsom salt steps right in for magnesium. And blackstrap molasses, that acts as the ultimate catalyst. But real quick, before we mix this all up, we've got to bust a decades-old internet myth about coffee grounds. For years, bloggers have warned that coffee grounds make soil highly acidic. Well, that is only a half-truth. Fresh, unbrewed coffee grounds are indeed acidic, but the used grounds, the ones left over in your French press, they're nearly neutral, sitting right between 6.5 and 6.8 on the pH scale. That is exactly where most vegetable gardens want to be. They won't acidify your bed, instead they beautifully improve soil texture and slowly release nitrogen.
Let's zoom in on 2 specialized ingredients in our cocktail. If you look at your leaves and see yellowing between the green veins, that's called intervenal chlorosis. It means a severe lack of magnesium, which sits at the very center of chlorophyll. The Epsom salt in our recipe cures this specific yellowing by delivering direct magnesium. But the true secret weapon of this entire brew is the blackstrap molasses. It acts as pure food for hyperactive microbes. By stirring in just 1 tablespoon of molasses, you shrink the time it takes to break down these peels and shells from 3 weeks down to just 3 days. You just steep it all in a gallon of warm water, and boom, you have an instant rescue tonic.
And finally, that brings us to number 5, manure tea, the ancient secret.
This is an old-school technique, used way before bananas or coffee were sitting on grocery store shelves. To understand why it's so vital, we actually look back to 1913 and the invention of the Haber-Bosch process, which pulls nitrogen right out of thin air to create synthetic ammonia fertilizers. Now, it's an invention credited with feeding half the human population, but it came with a massive historical trade-off. It basically taught farmers to feed the plant while starving the soil. The resulting synthetic nitrogen created dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, collapsed soil structures, and basically destroyed microbial life. And that is exactly why old-time farmers vastly preferred the giant teabag method to keep the entire ecosystem alive and thriving.
So how do we actually brew this manure tea? Well, you basically make a giant tea bag using a porous sack, like an old pillowcase, fill it with aged manure, and drop it into a 5-gallon bucket of water. Let it steep for 3 to 5 days, then dilute it 1 part tea to 10 parts water until it looks like weak iced tea. You apply it in the cool evening. But right, there is one absolutely critical mistake you must avoid at all costs. Never use fresh manure. Fresh droppings carry extreme ammonia and weed seeds that will literally burn an entire row of seedlings to the ground in 48 hours. It absolutely must be aged for 6 months to a year.
Now, picking the right aged manure totally changes the profile of your tea. Chicken manure has the highest nitrogen, acting as a massive growth stimulant to push tired plants into heavy flowering. Cow manure is lower in nitrogen, but it's exceptional for building long-term soil structure. And rabbit manure? That's the quiet secret of experienced gardeners. It's so gentle, it's actually the only one safe to apply raw to young seedlings. And remember, applying this tea at sunset prevents the nitrogen from just evaporating in the midday heat, letting your plant's roots drink deeply all night long.
To bring this whole explainer full circle, wrap your head around this staggering reality. The average American kitchen routes more nitrogen to the landfill in a single week than a small vegetable garden actually needs in a whole month. The nutrients your dying plants are begging for aren't scarce at all. They are simply being thrown away. These 5 liquids solve entirely different problems instantly, they cost absolutely nothing, and they rely on ingredients we blindly toss out every single day. It's pretty incredible to think the ultimate fertilizers have literally been hiding right under our noses, ready to unlock a thriving garden for free. So I'll leave you with this. The next time a proud tomato plant fades or a pepper stops setting fruit, are you going to reach for the shovel or the trash can? Think differently about your kitchen waste this week, and hey, let us know which of these lost methods you plan to try out first.